Welcome to Renegade Inc., the show that allows us to think differently. It sounds like your typical pub joke. Have you heard the gag about the police officer who arrested the judge? Only there is no punchline. It's not a joke because it actually happened. This is the story of a cop who didn't feel he was getting justice, so he made an arrest he maintains is lawful and paid the price for his actions.
Being taken away in the prison bus and being transported over in this tiny cell and then arriving and getting brought in, getting strip searched in the place. You know, it's very humiliating, and getting given the prison clothes to go in, and right up to getting put into my cell and the cell door just banging shut, and knowing that was me for, well, 3-month sentence, like for 6 weeks. Just the frustration and sense of injustice, just horrendous.
Joining me to explain how he arrested a senior High Court judge in his own courtroom is the former Northern Irish police officer, Anthony Carlin. Anthony, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much for having me. Yeah.
It's important to note that at the top, all the stuff that we're going to talk about is in the public domain, and this is a case that has happened.
Yes.
Let's start by the chronological version of events.
Yes.
So what happened? You were a police officer in Northern Ireland, serving happily.
Yes.
Going about your work, and you bought a house.
I did.
And you got a mortgage on that house.
I did.
And you were in that house with your wife and 2 children.
Yeah, only one at that stage, yeah. But
right. Yeah. And then what happened? Because that's a happy family life. You're doing your work, your wife's happy, then what?
One day, 2 years after we took out the mortgage, we got a letter in the post, and it said that our mortgage had went up from, it was like £290 a month, and the next payment was £1,000 thereafter.
Right.
And it was just a complete gunk. I mean, I was working 40, 50 hours a week as a police officer and a good job with good wages, and we couldn't afford it.
So you're on a teaser rate, is this right? You're on a teaser rate for the mortgage to begin with, or you're on an introductory rate?
Introductory 2-year rate.
Right. And during that time, you're happily going along, and then suddenly the letter comes through and it pushes the repayments up to a point that you can't.
Yeah, we couldn't reasonably afford, no.
And did you know that that was going to happen? Did you know that at some point that teaser rate was going to expire and you're going to be hit with a bigger bill?
How it was sold to me was, you know, whenever this deal expires, just get another deal. But the thing that changed all of that was the 2008 crash. So the value of the houses all came down, and when it came time for me to renew it and get a new deal, the bank said they wouldn't do it because my house was negative equity.
So you then can't go to another lender?
Well, I tried going to another lender. I went to another bank and asked them would they give me a new deal, and they said, "Is your house in negative equity?" And I had to say yes. So they says, "No, we're not doing deals at that point." And that was an internal decision, which left me then in a position that I was a mortgage prisoner, where I had a mortgage and I had to pay that every single month or else it would be repossessed.
And by paying that, did that in any way compromise your living standards?
Massively. There was all of our disposable income just went to paying the mortgage. So I was going to work and eating, you know, really poor lunches and just, you know, struggling to survive.
Why? Because all the money was coming in and going out to the bank?
Yes, on an interest-only mortgage.
So you weren't paying the capital repayment?
No.
So what was the thinking behind it?
Well, the urgency was, I mean, as time moved on, I was just giving them all the money that they wanted, and I just found that we were struggling to get past. I mean, the wife's mum had to say, get a fill of oil for us, and every so often gives a wee cash injection to help us just get by with the basics. And I got to the stage, the children were needing clothes and we hadn't the money to get them, and that was really embarrassing for me that, you know, as I was going out, it wasn't that I was being lazy, I was working all the hours, and I knew I had to change something.
When you say you knew you had to change something, change what?
Well, I wasn't going to live as a debt slave. I wasn't going to sit there and work all those hours just to pay the bank interest money on a loan that I now know they didn't give me. But I wasn't prepared to do that.
There are people sitting watching this thinking, yeah, but hang on, you signed up to that mortgage, and therefore, you know, that's a contract, that's a bond, and so
yes.
You had the opportunity to change that within that 2-year deal.
Yeah.
Why didn't you?
Well, it's naivety and a lack of good guidance from the mortgage broker was, you know, to set a plan in place. This is only a temporary deal for a certain length of time. You need to get in at a certain point. I'll schedule an appointment for you to go back in and see me.
And did they do any of that?
None of that, no.
So it wasn't a case of mis-selling, but there wasn't a duty of care to you as a borrower?
Well, I think there was a degree of mis-selling because it was an interest-only mortgage and there was no financial vehicle to pay off the loan at the end.
And do you think that the target-based culture then has pushed mortgage brokers, banks, to offload product without explaining fully what that product entails?
Absolutely.
And do you think you're a victim of that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, like thousands and thousands of other people.
Why?
You want the house. You just want a house and you want to get it at something that you can afford, and there's these big array of packages and deals and you don't know one from the other and you're taking the mortgage broker at their word. And maybe they're looking at it from which one they can get the biggest fee for. I don't know what their motivation is, but all I know is I was given different options.
And you took that option in good faith?
Took it in good faith, and everyone else had a mortgage, and I had no reason to think that I would get into financial difficulty because I was in a good job. It all just came as a big... That letter changed everything. It changed my thought processes, where I realised now I'm being held here as a mortgage prisoner. What do I need to do to navigate my family and I away from this, this financial mess, to a place where we've got a quality of life? Because you want your kids to have swimming lessons and, the good things in life. That was my first priority. So I just started going then and doing research and going to meetings down in Dublin and stuff, because there was no one in Northern Ireland that was offering any education at that point.
What education were you looking for, and what meetings were you going to?
If you go to Citizens Advice, they just give you this churned out information that's very clinical and nothing to it, and they almost agree with the corporations. Whereas this was groups of lay litigants, people who'd been in the trenches, people who'd been in court, who'd done lots of investigating, and what they were saying was entirely different from the stuff that was being churned out by the mainstream.
When you started down that route, did you have any idea of the financial sector, the banking system? Did you have any clue about how any of that works?
I had zero experience or knowledge in it whatsoever. I was a police officer, I knew about the police. I was a former electrician, I had different life experiences, but I had no knowledge whatsoever about the financial side of things.
But you've got to be overwhelmed initially to undertake that size of task.
Well, at the time it was either take on a solicitor and barrister, which I couldn't afford, or else do it myself. And because I had the grounding of being in the police for 10 years, I knew about the law and I knew how the system worked, although civil law is entirely different.
So the education begun, you went to these meetings, you met fellow travellers, people who were in the same situation as
yes.
you. Then what?
One of the solutions that came was to do an official offer, which is basically, it's one of the only photographs I've got of the journey where I went on the online bank and I've clicked the button, pulled the trigger and stopped the direct debit for the mortgage.
Which is a significant moment.
It really was, yeah. I had to just sort of take the monkey off my back, And what I did was then I sent them in, it's called an official offer, which is basically a document with specific wording saying that you're going to give them a certain amount of money per month for all of your obligations. And you attach a cheque to it. And when you send it in recorded delivery, when the bank detach the cheque from the piece of paper, that's them accepting the terms and conditions. And then and also then they go and cash it. So
did they cash the cheque?
They did cash the cheque, yes.
And is that an official final offer?
It's an official offer. No, what I was doing was I brought it down to £105 a month. It's a big reduction in what we were paying out. But, the washing machine had broken and all the things that over that year had deteriorated, needed fixed again and had to get everything on an even keel. And when I did that, I was going to start increasing it to £200, £300, £400, £500 a month.
Fine, but also people watching this will say, well, hang on, you've stopped payments of your mortgage to your mortgage lender. And in some people's book, that's absolutely no-go.
Yeah, well, I understand that, but for me, it was so difficult for me to look at my children and look at my wife and see how much we were struggling, and I couldn't work any more than I was working, so I couldn't bring in more income. So I had to reduce the outgoings, and so I cancelled the direct debit. I didn't stop paying; I reduced the payments.
What happened then? Basically,
within 6 months, I got the letters to say that litigation was starting, and I found myself going to room 118 in the Royal Courts of Justice in Belfast, which is the room of the master, and that's basically the rubber stamper for all the mortgages. So people go in there. Most of them is just to say rubber stamped and the repossession has gone through. Some people stand up, some people are represented. But that's the first port of call. Wow. So I spent, I'm sure it was 2 years in there, back and forth. I didn't even know what an affidavit was. Some of the guys in the other groups had to send me a template of an affidavit. So I had to figure out all of that stuff. I had to figure out what arguments I was going to use, what was valid, what worked, how did the financial system work, where did I fit in the scheme of all these things. And one of the strongest arguments I had was securitization, whereby banks would get 1,000 mortgages together and they would sell it off to an investor, and that investor would pay the bank the full amount of the mortgage, right? And so I accused Santander of it, went and done a bit of research, and to the best of my knowledge, I understood that they had securitized my mortgage. But during the whole litigation, they denied doing it. And at the end of it, after it was in April 2013, they got a repossession order in the Master's Court for the property.
For your house?
Yes.
And you're still working at that point?
Still working at the police.
As a police officer? Yeah. And you realise at that point, you're sitting in that courtroom, that house is going to be repossessed?
Yes.
And effectively, your wife and children and you...
going to be thrown out in the street.
Are homeless?
Yeah.
What happened at that moment?
So you have a right to appeal. So you appeal to the higher court. So I went down and I stuck in an appeal, and while the appeal's ongoing, they can't enforce the repossession. So it gives you a bit of time. So that was April 2013, and then it was scheduled for the appeal in September. But Santander had mentioned that they said that some of the issues I had raised in the first part of litigation, they were going to give me an affidavit to address my concerns. So the judge told them to do it within 4 weeks, but they didn't do it for 3 months. So the affidavit landed in my in through the house, the letterbox, 4 days before the hearing. So it came in, it was unstamped, it was just very unprofessional. But skimming through it, there was just one paragraph where it said, basically, oh, by the way, we did securitise your mortgage, but we only sold the equitable interest and only sold it for a small period of time. So we're trying to minimise the damage. So my reading of that was, oh, so you're saying that you did tell lies. So you told lies in order to make me and my family homeless.
And specifically, what was the lie that you allege that they told to make your family homeless?
I alleged that they had securitised my mortgage. I was like 95% certain that they had. And then they denied it point blank. And then, so they give a sworn affidavit. So if you give an affidavit and you pick a Bible up in your right hand and you swear that what's in there is the truth to the best of your knowledge, if it turns out there's lies in there and you've done that intentionally, that's perjury. So that's 7 years in jail. So they had committed perjury.
Because they had said your mortgage had not been securitised.
Yes.
And you're saying it had been securitised and sold on to a third party.
Yes, and it's not the fact that I'm just picking hairs. The third party paid Santander £192,000. It turns out they paid them on 2 separate occasions. So Santander had been paid the full amount of the money. So why were they looking me to pay £1,000 a month and, threatened to throw me and the kids out in the street?
Because is it the case that you'd made that initial contract with them and you'd broken that and therefore...
Well, any contract that we had, then they've then made a contract with a third party. And so every month when I was giving them that £1,000, they were taking it and giving it to the third party and holding it a bit back for themselves. They were a servicing agent. And none of that was disclosed to me. They don't send you any letters asking for permission. It's done, and it happens with like 80% of mortgages.
So a lot of mortgage holders out there don't actually have a relationship with the bank that is, or the financial institution that's lending them the money. They don't have the kind of relationship that they think that they signed up to.
They are misled by the bank.
Why?
How do you think people are going to feel if the bank come out and say, by the way, we've been paid the full amount of your mortgage, but we still have retained, we've done legal shenanigans and we still have the right to repossess our house. So if you stop paying it, we're going to repossess your house, even though we've been paid the full amount of the mortgage on 2 separate occasions. And if you're in arrears of 90 days or more, there's an insurance policy kicks in and they get paid the full amount of the house again. So they can be paid 3-4 times, the full amount of the mortgage, but still chase you for any shortfall. That's horrendous.
Welcome back to Renegade Inc., the show that allows us to think differently. I'm here in the studio with Anthony Carlin, a former police officer who arrested a judge in Belfast during his fight to prevent his home from being repossessed. So, as we said in the first half, you've worked out how the banking system works. How you think it works initially and how it actually works are 2 separate things. How did you think banks worked?
Well, when I took out the mortgage, it was my understanding that basically they'll check your financial history, you've got a job and the house is good and all the usual checks. And if all that checks out, they will then make you an offer to lend you money. Once you sign it, they then have got a big savings account somewhere with people's savings in it, and they transfer money there into your account. You borrow that and pay it back over 25 years at interest. The bank pays the money back to the people that they owe it to, and they keep the interest, and that's their profit.
But about 80% of people think that banks operate in that way.
No, that's a conspiracy theory.
Why is that a conspiracy theory?
Because the reality of it, I mean, in this very studio here, Professor Richard Werner came in and he's able to prove that no money comes in or out of the bank at any stage during that, and that banks don't lend money, but they mislead their customers and say that they do.
So you're firmly of the view that banks create money out of thin air?
Yes, well, I produced the first empirical studies to prove that in the 5,000-year history of banking. Banks are thought of as deposit-taking institutions that lend money. The legal reality is banks don't take deposits and banks don't lend money. Banks borrow from the public. Okay, so that much we've established. What about lending? Surely they're lending money. No, they don't. Banks don't lend money. Banks, again, at law, it's very clear, they're in the business of purchasing securities. That's it. So you say, okay, don't confuse me with all that legalese.
No.
I want a loan. I want a loan.
Yeah.
Fine. Here's the loan contract. Here's the offer letter, and you sign. At law, it's very clear. You have issued a security, namely a promissory note, and the bank is going to purchase that. That's what's happening.
Put it in layman's terms. What does that mean?
It means that what the bank is doing is very different from what it presents to the public that it's doing.
So then if you get an offer from a bank for any type of loan, a mortgage, any type of loan, they will send you an offer and it's got your name on it, it's got a date and it's got an amount of money and it's a promise to pay. As soon as you sign that document, that A4 piece of paper becomes a promissory note, which is a tradable financial document. and that's actually worth the money it's written on. So when you give that to the bank, you've just handed them a document that's worth, in my case, £192,000. So when Santander received that, they put it onto their ledger as an asset worth £192,000. They go on and type in £192,000, enter, and £192,000 is created into your account.
So the bank, that money doesn't exist in the bank before you put your paw print or your signature on that mortgage?
According to the Bank of England quarterly report from 2014 on the creation of money, the bank says that there's 3 different types of money. So there's reserves, which is savers' money. Reserves cannot be lent out. It's against the generally accepted accounting practices of a bank. The next one is cash and coins, the stuff in your pocket. Yeah. So when you take out a mortgage or a loan, they don't come to your house with a big wheelbarrow full of money and tip it into your living room. So the only one that's left is the third one, which is a banking deposit. And that's the digital currency, which accounts for 97% of money on the planet Earth. That's a bank that's just created out of thin air. It's invented into existence. And the only time they can do that is when they have a promissory note, which is backed by the 1881 Bills of Exchange Act.
You then go on this journey of discovery, specifically around securitization.
Yes.
What happened then?
See, Santander had initially denied that. They denied securitising my mortgage, and then they admitted later on in an affidavit that they had done it.
Right.
So the case was struck out.
So and at that point, you were being repossessed?
Yes.
Right. But you took it to appeal.
Yes.
And then the appeal process, the judge struck that case out.
Yes.
That's unheard of, really.
It is, yes.
Were you shocked?
I couldn't believe it. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know whether I still had a mortgage or still owed the money. I didn't know what it meant. But there's no other case in the UK that we can find. It's very, very unusual. And It's just because they were caught red-handed telling lies.
And what were they specifically lying about?
They said they had never sold my mortgage to a third party.
But they had?
But they had.
And you found evidence of that?
Yes. And I knew that they'd been paid the full amount, but I didn't get to know how much they'd been paid until I sent off for a subject access request to Santander. And when it came back, a 2-inch thick envelope with all the documents, searching through there, I found a listings document, which is like a statement, but there's more information. And I'm going through that. On the date they admitted securitising my mortgage, there's a mysterious payment for £192,000 coming into my account. It zeroes the balance, and the same day the money disappears again.
That was the smoking gun, and that was the moment that you found evidence that they had lied.
That's right. I mean, as a police officer that worked in evidence, that was concrete evidence that the bank had been paid the full amount of the mortgage, but they misled the court and failed to inform the court of this. Whenever I got the subject access request and I had all those documents, I then went in the offensive and put in a strikeout application, which was heard in September 2015.
Right.
And the basis of that was the Bank of England quarterly report and the listings document. So they didn't lend me money in the first place, and then they'd been paid the full amount of the mortgage twice.
Right.
I said to the judge, I have proof here that the bank didn't lend me money and that they've been paid the full amount of the mortgage. If they're saying I owe them money, they must produce evidence.
Could they produce evidence?
No, they didn't want to cooperate at all. So I tried to use legislation to compel the judge to make them do it. And I used 2 bits of primary legislation, the Bankers' Book of Evidence Act, to compel the judge. And then he basically heard all the arguments, and then he adjourned to make his decision. That took 3 months. So in the meantime, I sent him an email and I said to him, if you find against me without getting them to prove evidence that that I owe them money, then you'll be committing a criminal offence.
You said that to the judge?
I sent him an email. I was very respectful. I tiptoed in, but I sent him an email and said, if you do that, you're committing a criminal offence.
Why would he be committing a criminal offence?
Because the banks have got a judicial guarantee of success in the banks. It's a Celtic game and people can't win. There's no one ever in the history of the banks have won against the banks in court. Otherwise, it would set a precedent. There's cases that are settled off the books, but they're not in the public domain. But no one has ever beat a bank. I beat them once, but it was only a temporary thing, and they came at me in a second wave.
So you've written the judge an email, and that case or that trial then started.
So I turn up in court, and he's handing down his judgment. And within a minute, I realise that he's going to find against me. Blatantly so. He ignored all of the legislation, he ignored absolutely everything, and he was refusing my strikeout application.
And the cogs are whirring. You realise that this case isn't going in your favour?
I went into police mode, and I asked myself a simple question. Do I honestly believe that he's committing a criminal offence right now? Right. And the answer was yes. So I reached in my back pocket and took out my warrant card and held it up and says, I'm a serving police officer in the PSNI, and I'm now arresting you for 5 criminal offences. And I didn't shout, I raised my voice enough to be heard. The security guard came over, he tried to get in my face, and I warned him that he was obstructing a constable in the lawful execution of his duty. It's his job to protect the judge, and he's sitting looking at a warrant card of a police officer and a judge, and his eyes were nearly turned in, because he didn't know what to do. And then I walked up to the judge, I stood at an appropriate distance away from him, I wasn't threatening, I raised my voice enough to be heard over. He was ranting and telling me to sit down and whatever else. So I says, John Gillen, I'm now arresting you for 5 criminal offences.
What were the offences?
Misconduct in public office, malfeasance, fraud by suppression of documents, fraud by abusive position, and aiding and abetting the theft of my home. You don't have to say anything. I must caution you. Do not mention one question something. You later rely on a court martial defence, and then you do say may be given in evidence.
What did he say?
Now, Mr. Carlin. And I looked at him and I says, was that your reply after caution, my lord?
And what did he do?
He jumped up and he ran out of the court. So I went over and banged the door, asked someone to call for police, for uniform to come to assist me with my highly unusual arrest.
Yes.
But pace dictates that whenever there's an arrest, that arrested person has to go to the nearest custody suite, which was Musgrave Street Police Station, 200 metres away.
So, but you arrested him and you wanted him out of that courtroom and into the nearest police station because you wanted to charge him with the 5 counts that you'd...
I go in, and the custody sergeant's the only person in pace that's allowed to make that decision.
Yes.
No one else can. I put the circumstances of the arrest to that sergeant, and she has to determine whether it was or was not a lawful arrest.
Right.
At that point, whenever the police came, they didn't arrest the judge. They arrested me for this assault, an alleged assault against the judge, and they took me out of the court. They breached the code of ethics. They refused to do their job, and they deviated from pace. They took me into the police station. I spent half of the day there. I was interviewed by the police ombudsman, not the police, because if the police had interviewed me, they would have to have investigated any counter allegations that I made. The police ombudsman just deal with police. So I was interviewed by them. In the middle of it, the judge that I arrested summoned me from the court, or from the police station. So they took me from the police station back to the court in front of the judge that I had arrested. He starts ranting off about contempt of court. I stood up and objected to him holding proceedings because he was under arrest. He then told me to sit down and have me arrested, and I'm sitting there in handcuffs. So once he had finished with me and gave me a date to go back to court for contempt of court, I was took back to the police station. They finished with me, and then I was bailed for 30 days.
You go back to court, and what happens?
So I was put on a trial. I objected to the judge that I had arrested holding the proceedings. You can't be a judge in your own matter. So I wanted to have a jury trial. I'm entitled to one under the Constitution, all that stuff. It was just a whitewash.
And what happened?
They put me in jail for 3 months, simply for having done my job, as I'm compelled to do.
How was that?
I couldn't believe it. I never believed they put me in prison. Never believed it. But I found myself there going off. I'd been put in the news. All the inmates knew I was coming to prison that day. And they were all waiting for me, and they were all shouting out the windows and just calling me all the names and, banging the doors. And crazy. I'll never forget the cell door shutting. The big bang, there's a big door this thick, and it just banged shut. They sentenced me to 3 months, and they said that they would let me out after 28 days if I apologised.
And you were left with that choice?
I was left with that choice.
And who did you speak to about the choice?
But it wasn't my decision, it was my wife's decision.
Well, why was it her decision?
Well, because she was dealing with all the kids, she was dealing with all the hassle on the outside. I just had to sit in a cell. She dealt with the whole family. So
what do you do?
So I rang her up and I said to her, look, you make the call. I know what I want to do, but it's your call.
And what did you want to do?
I didn't want to apologise. If I had done something, I'd apologise the first second if I had done something wrong. So I said, what do you want me to do? And she told me to tell him to go and F himself. And it was brilliant. It was brilliant that she supported me. Even though she was in the middle of dealing with very, very difficult circumstances, she still understood and saw that what I did and why I done it. And she told me not to apologise.
So you go back to your cell, and then what?
Justin Bieber was playing. Is it too late to say sorry? And I was moonwalking up and down my court. I just felt elated, that I felt supported. So, and that's what happened. So I done the rest of my time, and then got out of all days April Fool's Day. So the 1st of April 2016.
That prison experience must have been horrendous, especially as a serving police officer.
Yeah. I was threatened to be killed and stuff in there. They were throwing bottles at the window and cigarettes and all that sort of stuff there and threatening to kill me. One of the inmates came to the door and was banging the door and staring in at me, and he says, you're going to stiff me.
And then the threat to kill, is that why you were moved out of?
Eventually, because I went in, the police have a duty of care to look after, because I went in there as a police officer, so my employers had a duty of care to ensure that I was safe, and they didn't do one thing. They just threw me in the general population. I kept asking, are you going to put me somewhere that's a bit safer than this? And they said, no, we'll wait and see what happens. So I just wait on something happening to me, so I couldn't go out of my cell. Anytime I went to the shower, I rang the risk of being slashed or stabbed or having a cup of boiling hot water through around me. So whenever the death threat came, then at that point, then they moved me over to the hospital wing. And that was horrendous, because it was all sex offenders and stuff over in there, and it was safer in there. I was next to someone who was a convicted child killer. My kids were at home with no father. It's horrendous.
You get out of prison, having had a torrid time.
So I was straight out of prison, and then within a week, then the police were taking proceedings against me to dismiss me.
Do you now still have a job with the police?
No. So it took them a few months, but all my appeals failed. And the important one was the policing board for Northern Ireland. They were the impartial party. They had an obligation to look at the police's actions as well as mine. They refused to do it.
But you've still got this mortgage case.
Yeah.
So as we sit here today, where are you up to with the mortgage case, with the family, the job, and also...
No, I've started working again. I'm trying to sort of keep a relationship with the wife going, all the stresses and strains that's caused. The litigation's ongoing. I'm now in discovery process where I'm asking Santander to provide, I'm using the Banker's Book of Evidence again. I'm doing all this again to get them to provide evidence that they lent me money and that where did the money for the securitization come from.
And from a gut feeling point of view, or because you've been through this so many times, where do you think this is going to end up?
No one who's ever went up against the banks has won and beat them.
What keeps you going then? What keeps you in this fight?
I'm just sticking to the truth and just keeping going, because if we all lie down to these criminals, it's just it decimates the amount of people that's committed suicide, the amount of people that families are destroyed and split up because of this immoral pretense of lending money. It's debt slavery and people can't cope with it. It's destroying a society that my daughters are growing up in. So I'm fit for it, so I'll fight while there's breath in my body to protect my family and to do the right thing for society.
Anthony, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We contacted Santander, the Police Service of Northern Ireland and the Judiciary of Northern Ireland for comment. This is what they had to say. That's it from Renegade Inc. this week. You can drop the team a mail, studio@renegadeinc.com, or you can tweet us @RenegadeInc. Join us next week for more insight from those people who are thinking differently. But until then, stay curious.